My mother didn't raise her voice. She looked straight at the 5-year-old girl holding my hand, my future husband's daughter, and spoke like she was stating a fact. That child is baggage you'll regret raising, someone else's leftover. Take the check, leave them both, and come home clean. She had already written the letter. The check was folded inside it. I kept both. For 9 years they erased us. No calls, no cards, no grandmother. Then my husband's company sold for $44 million. And 9 days later, my mother stood on my porch with my sister, smiling, calling herself Grandma. My daughter is 14 now. She had read every word of that letter years earlier. When my mother reached for her, my girl only smiled and said one quiet sentence. That sentence was all it took. My name is Andrea Kite and I am 38 years old. Before we go further, if you're new here, take a second to like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I read every single one. Now let me tell you how a folded piece of paper survived 9 years, and why my daughter was the one holding it when it finally mattered. The text came on a Tuesday, at 6 in the morning. I was standing at the counter in our kitchen in Fishers, Indiana, waiting for the coffee to finish, with a stack of client invoices fanned out in front of me, because I do the books for a dozen small businesses, and Tuesdays are when I close out the previous week. My phone lit up. A number I had blocked from my life, though I had never quite been able to delete it. Andrea, it's Mom. I think it's time we were a family again. I'd love to finally meet my granddaughter. Grandma XOXO. I read it twice. Not because it was hard to understand, because of the last word, granddaughter, as if she had ever asked her name. I didn't answer. I set the phone face down on the invoices, and I went to the hall closet, where we keep a small fireproof box, the gray kind you buy for passports and birth certificates, and the papers you can't afford to lose in a house fire. I keep our tax returns in there. I keep the deed. And I keep an envelope that has gone soft at the corners from being handled by 2 different people across 9 years. I'm a bookkeeper. I don't lose things, especially not the things people wish I had. I didn't open the envelope that morning. I just put my hand on it, the way you check that a scar is still there. Then I closed the box. Was that her? Hazel was in the doorway in her school hoodie, her backpack already on one shoulder. 14 years old, taller than me since Christmas, with her father's steady eyes and a way of standing very still when something matters. It was, I said. She didn't ask what my mother wanted. She already knew. She said, "Are you going to let her come?" And that was the strange part, the part you need to understand before any of the rest of it makes sense. My daughter, the child my mother had called baggage, was the one who wanted the door opened, not to forgive. She wasn't a soft girl about this. She wanted the door opened for a reason she'd been carrying quietly for 2 years, and I didn't fully understand it until the day my mother stood in my living room and reached for her. To explain that, I have to go back to the year my mother priced a little girl at $50,000. I met Cole in the spring of 2016. I was 29. He ran a 2-man plumbing and heating outfit out of a rented bay and a work van with 190,000 miles on it, and he'd hired me to clean up his books because he was a good technician and a terrible bookkeeper, and he knew the difference. That is more than most men know about themselves. The first time I went to his shop, his daughter was there. Hazel was 4. Her mother, Dana, had left when Hazel was 2. Just left, the way some people leave. No forwarding address, no fight over custody, no anything. Cole had been raising her alone for 2 years, which meant she came to the shop after preschool and sat in the corner with a coloring book and a juice box while he ran service calls, because childcare on a service tech's income is its own kind of impossible. "I can pay you Thursday," he told me that first week. "Maybe Friday. Hazel had a dentist thing." He looked genuinely sorry about it. "She comes first. I know that's not how you run a business." I had never wanted to work for free so badly in my life. Hazel didn't warm up to me the way TV children do. She watched me for 2 weeks. Then one afternoon she slid a piece of paper across the folding table where I was working, without a word, and went back to her corner. It was a drawing. 3 stick figures. A tall one, a medium one, and a small one. holding hands under a yellow scribble of a sun. Underneath, in the shaky capitals of a 4-year-old, she had written, "You, me, Dad. I want to be honest with you about something, because this story only works if I am. I fell in love with her before I fell in love with him. I bought a box of 48 colored pencils that weekend, the good kind, and I told myself it was because the shop's crayons were broken, and I knew even then that I was in trouble. By that fall, Cole and I were together. By the winter, I was buying an ornament at a drugstore checkout, a little tin sled with First Family Christmas 2016 stamped on it, and hanging it on the hook over our stove because we didn't have a tree yet. That ornament is still in my kitchen. It has never come down. Hold on to that, because it comes back. My family is a different kind of story. The Vances are respectable people in the way that word can be used as a weapon. My father, Curtis, sold commercial insurance for 30 years and said almost nothing at the dinner table. My mother, Lorraine, ran the household, the church committee, the neighborhood association, and the family narrative, in roughly that order of importance to her. And my older sister, Bridget, was the daughter the whole apparatus was built to serve. Bridget was the pretty one, the married one, the one whose husband Todd had a contracting business and a boat. Bridget got the down payment help. Bridget got the wedding at the country club. Bridget got the version of my parents that showed up. I told my mother I was seeing someone over a Sunday dinner, in the spring of 2017. "A plumber," she said, setting down her fork with the particular care she used when she wanted you to notice she was being patient. "With someone else's child. Andrea, you have a degree." "She'll get bored," Bridget said, not even looking up. "She always does." "Bring him," my mother said finally. "Let's see what we're dealing with." I should have heard the trap in that. What we're dealing with, not who. Cole came to dinner. He brought Hazel because there was no one to leave her with, and because he wasn't the kind of man who'd pretend he didn't have a daughter to make a better impression. He wore a shirt I'd never seen him wear before, ironed. I was polite and honest and a little out of his depth with the multiple forks, and I loved him so much across that table that it physically hurt. Todd asked him about the business the way a man asks a question he already plans to answer for you. "Home services, huh? That's a young man's game. What's the exit?" Cole didn't flinch. "Feeding my daughter," he said. "That's the exit." Hazel knocked over her water glass, reaching for the bread. "It happens. She's 5. She apologized 3 times, her face going red, and started dabbing at the tablecloth with her cloth napkin. And my mother rose, took the napkin from her hand without a word, and replaced the entire place setting with a small, closed smile that I have never been able to forget. In the car on the way home, Hazel was quiet in her booster seat. Then she said, very small, "Did I do something wrong?" "No, baby," I told her. "You didn't do anything wrong." I have thought about that question more than almost anything else in my life. It followed her for years. It is, in a way, the whole thing. A week later, I told my mother we were engaged. She invited me over, just me. "We need to talk before you do something permanent," she said. And I went, because I still believed at 29 that if I explained it well enough she would understand. That was my blind spot, and I kept it for a long time. I kept believing that the right words, said calmly enough, would reach her. Cole and Hazel came too, waiting in the car, because we were going somewhere after. My mother didn't know that until she opened the door and saw them, and then a decision moved across her face and settled. "Bring them in," she said. I thought that was a good sign. She sat us in the front room, the one with the good furniture nobody used. She had a cup of tea in front of her, and her hands were perfectly still. Hazel stood beside me, her hand in mine, watching the porcelain figurines on the shelf. My mother looked at her. Not at me. At my 5-year-old. "That child is baggage you'll regret raising," she said, in the same voice she'd used to tell you the roast needed 10 more minutes. "Someone else's left over. Take the check, leave them both, and come home clean." Then she slid an envelope across the coffee table. She had written it before we arrived. She had known before she opened the door. Inside was a letter in her own tight cursive, and folded into the letter was a check. $50,000. The memo line was blank. "I want to read you the letter, because it's the reason all of this happened. And because my mother spent 9 years assuming it no longer existed. Andrea, your father and I won't watch you throw your life away on a man who fixes furnaces and someone else's leftover child. She is not your problem, and she is not our grandchild. Take the enclosed, leave them both, and come home clean, without the baggage you'll regret raising. The door stays closed until you do. Love, Mom. The check was in my father's handwriting. He wrote the checks in that house. He wrote that one. He was in the next room, and he did not come out. I picked up the envelope. Hazel was still holding my other hand. I remember thinking, very clearly, that whatever I did in the next 10 seconds, she would feel for the rest of her life, even if she never understood it. I did not tear it up. People expect that part, the dramatic rip, the scattered pieces. I didn't do it. I folded the check back into the letter, and I put the whole thing in my purse. I'll keep this, I said. My mother mistook that for hesitation. She almost smiled. I kept it as a fact. Not as a threat, not as leverage, not as a weapon I plan to use. I'm a bookkeeper. When someone hands you a document that records exactly who they are, you don't throw it away, you file it. Cole married me that summer. I took his name, Kite, and I did it on purpose, the way you plant a flag. Nobody from my family came. Hazel, 5 years old, threw flower petals down the aisle of a rented hall and got most of them on herself. That night, I put the $50,000 check in the fireproof box in the hall closet, next to the deed we didn't have yet, and the tax returns we barely needed to file. I thought the letter was the worst thing my mother would ever do to us. It wasn't. The worst thing was the 9 years of nothing that came after. You have to understand what erasure actually looks like, because it isn't loud. It's a phone that doesn't ring on a birthday. It's a Christmas where the mailbox has cards from the dentist and the car dealership and no one else. It's your daughter, at 7, asking whether other kids' grandmas come to the school play. Because there was a school play, the fall. Hazel was in 2nd grade. She was a tree. Not a lead tree. One of 4 trees in the back row, with a costume I made out of a cardboard box and green felt because I am not a craftsperson, and it showed. She had 2 lines. She practiced them at the kitchen table for a week, in a voice that got smaller every time she thought about the audience. I mailed an invitation to my parents. I want you to know how that felt to do. To buy the little card at the drugstore, to write the date and the school and the time in my neatest hand, to seal it and walk it to the mailbox, believing that maybe a grandmother could not resist a 7-year-old in a tree costume. Cole watched me do it and didn't say anything, because he loved me, and he knew hope is a thing you have to let a person work out of their own system. No one came. Not my mother, not my father. 2 seats I'd mentally saved stayed empty in a cafeteria full of other people's grandparents with their phones up. Hazel said both her lines. She found me in the crowd afterward, still in her felt branches, and the first thing she asked, before did I do good, was, did anybody else come for me? We came for you, I said. Me and Dad. We're the ones who come. It was true. It just wasn't the whole answer, and she was old enough to hear the shape of the part I wasn't saying. In 2019, I mailed my parents a Christmas card. I don't fully know why. Hope is a stubborn, embarrassing thing. It was a photo card. The 3 of us in front of a tree we finally owned, Hazel with a gap where her front teeth used to be. I addressed it to the house I grew up in. It came back 3 weeks later. Stamped return to sender across the front. But underneath the stamp, in the corner, in my mother's handwriting, no. Just that. One word, in the cursive, I'd know anywhere. I stood in my kitchen and I understood something I'd been refusing to understand for 2 years. It wasn't that they hadn't gotten around to us. It wasn't distance or awkwardness or waiting for me to make the first move. They were choosing this, every day, on purpose. I put the returned card in the fireproof box, next to the letter. 2 pieces of my mother's handing, now. She'd forgotten, I think, that I keep things. There was a night, the winter Hazel was 9, that tested me worse than the card did. She'd had a cough for a couple of days, nothing dramatic, and then at 2 in the morning she woke up unable to catch a full breath, her shoulders working, this thin whistling sound coming out of her. First real asthma attack. Cole was on the road for an emergency job an hour away. I got her in the car in her pajamas and drove to the ER with my hazards on, one hand on the wheel and one hand on her knee, telling her to match my breathing. In for 4, out for 4. The way you tell yourself things when you have no idea if they're helping. They took her back. They gave her a nebulizer and steroids, and by 4 in the morning, she was breathing easy and asking for the vending machine, the way kids do, all the terror already draining out of them and into you instead. And I sat in that molded plastic chair in the hallway, and I had my phone in my hand, and I scrolled to my mother's number. I want to be honest about this, because it's the least flattering true thing in this whole story. At 4 in the morning, with my daughter finally breathing, I almost called the woman who'd priced her at $50,000. Not for money, for a mother. For someone to say, "Is she okay? Do you need me to come?" That's how deep the wanting goes. It doesn't care what you know. I stared at the number until the screen went dark, and then I put the phone in my pocket, and I went and bought Hazel a bag of pretzels from the vending machine, and I did not call. That was the night I stopped waiting mostly. Not all at once, but mostly. That's a good place to say the thing I most want you to hear, because I know some of you are living some version of this right now. A lot of us have a relative who only remembers we exist when it becomes convenient, when there's a wedding, or a will, or a windfall. If you know that particular silence, do me a favor and leave a comment telling me, who came back only after your life got better? I ask because I think there are more of us than anyone admits. Here's the thing though, while 2 seats sat empty at a school play, other seats were full. Cole's crew came. His first 2 hires, Ray and a kid named Dev's dad. Ray especially, a 50-year-old master plumber with hands like catcher's mitts, who came to every one of Hazel's softball games he wasn't working, and yelled at the umpire louder than I did. My Aunt Deb drove up twice a year with a card and a 20, and a way of listening that ran in short supply in my family. The neighbors on our old street threw Hazel a birthday party the year she turned 10 because I mentioned once that she didn't have cousins nearby, and 11 kids showed up with presents wrapped in comic pages. I'm telling you this because these warm parts aren't filler in the story. They're the reason the cold parts hurt. My daughter was never short on people. She was short on exactly 2 of them, and those 2 had decided a magazine would have to tell them she was worth knowing. While my family was practicing our absence, Cole and I were building something. I want to be careful here, because the way these stories usually go, the husband is a secret genius who invents an app and suddenly there's $44 million. And that's a fairy tale. And fairy tales are how people end up believing they're failures for not getting rich by accident. Here's what actually happened, because I lived every unglamorous inch of it. Cole had one insight, and it was a boring one. He noticed that the money in home services wasn't in emergencies. It was in maintenance. Nobody wants to sell you a service plan. Everybody wants to sell you the $400 repair. Cole thought the repair was where you lost people, and the plan was where you kept them. Recurring contracts, he'd say, standing at the whiteboard we kept in the garage. Boring money. Boring money is the money that stays. We nearly didn't make it. In 2019, the same year that card came back, the transmission went out on our second van, the one we'd stretched to buy, and we had payroll due for the 2 guys Cole had hired. And for about 6 weeks we were genuinely, quietly, terrifyingly close to the end. I sat at that same kitchen counter, and I did what I do. I cleaned the books until they were spotless, until you could see exactly what the business was and exactly what it wasn't. And I took that clean picture to a credit union, and I got us a line of credit that a messier company would never have qualified for. That was my end of the house. Cole carried the work and the customers and the guys. I carried the numbers and the banks and the paper that made the numbers believable. 2 people carrying the same house from opposite ends. Not a genius and his supportive wife, a crew of 2. The break came in 2020, and it didn't feel like a break at the time. It felt like a headache. A regional property management company had a dozen apartment buildings and a maintenance situation that was bleeding them. A different contractor for every trade, no records, tenants furious, turnover on units taking weeks. Cole pitched them one contract, one number, all their plumbing and HVAC under a single recurring agreement, with a maintenance schedule instead of a parade of emergencies. They almost didn't sign. Because we were small, and they were scared of small. What closed it? It wasn't Cole's pitch. It was the binder I put together. Every one of our jobs costed out, our response times, our margins laid bare. A 5-year projection that a company our size had no business being able to produce. The property manager flipped through it and looked up and said, "You run a tighter shop on paper than outfits 4 times your size." That was me. That was the thing I brought that Cole couldn't. He could fix anything with a wrench. I could make a bank or a client believe the future. Boring money. It stayed. We added electrical. We hired more techs. We lost a good foreman in 2021 to a competitor who overpaid him, and it stung, and we survived it, and we learned to write contracts that didn't depend on any one person's handshake. By 2022, we were in a second city, then a third, always the same model, and the name on the vans was Copper Line Home Services, which Cole picked because copper is what the good pipe is made of, and a line is what you hold. Somewhere in there, my father did a small thing that I didn't understand until much later. In 2021, on Hazel's 9th birthday, a card arrived. No return address. Inside was a $20 bill and a signature that was just a shaky C, no name, and I recognized the handwriting because it was the same hand that had written a $50,000 check 4 years before. I never told Hazel who it was from. I didn't know what to do with it, so I did what I always do. I kept it, in the box, with the rest. Being controlled is not the same as being innocent. My father had signed the check and stayed in the other room and said nothing for years. A $20 bill in an unsigned card didn't undo that. But it was something, and I've learned that people are made of exactly these small, insufficient somethings, and what you do with them later is a choice you have to earn. Hazel grew up. That's the part these stories skip, and it's the part that matters most. She wasn't a symbol. She was a kid. She went through a phase where she only ate food that wasn't touching other food. She played travel softball and was a decent second baseman with a temper about called third strikes. She kept things, it ran in the family apparently, in a shoebox under her bed, ticket stubs and birthday envelopes, and a rock she was convinced was a geode. At 12, she got quiet in the particular way girls get quiet when they're doing more thinking than talking. I found out why 2 years later, but she found out first. It was the summer of 2024. Hazel was 12. She needed her birth certificate for a summer camp registration, and I was at a client's office, so I told her over the phone where the fireproof box was and gave her the code. The code is our wedding date. She knew it because it's on the little chalkboard in the kitchen where I write the family calendar. She found her birth certificate, and underneath it, she found a soft-cornered envelope, and because she is my daughter and curious to a fault, she read what was inside. She read that a woman she'd never met had called her baggage, someone else's leftover. She read that this woman had folded $50,000 into the letter to make her disappear, and that the check had never been cashed, and she was 12 years old and smart enough to understand every part of that, except the only part that mattered, which was that none of it was true about her. She didn't call me. She didn't cry to her father. She took a photograph of the letter and the check with her phone, and she put everything back exactly where it had been, in the same order, and she closed the box. And then she said nothing. For 2 years she said nothing. I didn't know. That's the part I have to sit with. For 2 years my daughter carried a number in her head, $50,000, the price of her own erasure, and she carried it alone, and she did it to protect me. She wrote it in a journal I only read much later. If Mom knew I read it, she wrote, in the round hand of a 12-year-old, she'd hurt for me. And she's already hurt enough because of me. She'd taken my mother's lie, that she was the reason I lost my family, and she'd believed just enough of it to decide her job was to keep me from feeling it again. A child had appointed herself the guardian of my peace. I would have given anything to take that job back from her. There's a moment I think about now that I didn't understand when it happened. That fall, when she was 13, she asked me out of nowhere at dinner whether I'd ever be sad if my mom died and we weren't talking. Just like that, between bites. I said something careful about how you can grieve a person and a relationship separately. She nodded, like she was filing it, and changed the subject to softball. I thought it was a random 13-year-old question. It wasn't random. She was testing the shape of a wound she already knew was there, and I couldn't see it, because I didn't know she'd read the letter. Everything she did in those 2 years had a second meaning I only get to see now, on the rewatch. She didn't have to wait long to set it down. Because that spring, Copperline sold. I need to tell you what $44 million actually is, because my family got this part very wrong, and their wrongness is most of the story. In April of 2026, a company called Banner Home Services Group, backed by a private equity firm named Halloran Capital, acquired Copperline. On paper, Cole's stake was worth $44 million. That is a real number and also a misleading one. The accountant who walked us through the closing put it plainly. On paper, you're worth $44 million, she said. In cash? In your account? A fraction of that. The rest is rollover equity and a 3-year earnout. You have to stay and run it to keep it. Which is to say, we did not become people with $44 million in a bank account. We became people with a large, mostly locked-up stake in a bigger company and a 3-year obligation for Cole to keep showing up to work every day so it wouldn't evaporate. Headline wealth is not a pile of cash. It's a promise with conditions. Whatever you do, Cole said, the night it closed, don't post it anywhere. I didn't. I'm not the posting kind, but an acquisition like that isn't a secret. Banner put out a press release announcing the deal. It didn't name a price. Those deals rarely do publicly. But there's a trade press for every industry, including ours, and one of the home services trade outlets ran the number as an estimate. Copperline acquired by Banner in deal estimated at $44. My brother-in-law Todd reads the trades. Of course he does. Todd's contracting business was, at that moment, quietly drowning. He had a balloon payment coming due, the kind of loan that lets you feel rich for a few years, and then asks for everything at once. And the rates had moved against him, and he was staring down the barrel of losing his equipment and his yard. Todd saw the number. Todd showed Bridget. I know what happened next, because my Aunt Deb showed me. Deb was on a family group thread with my mother and Bridget, one I'd been off of for 9 years, and she forwarded me a message. It was from Bridget to my mother. Mom, the trades put Copperline at $44 million. Todd's balloon is due next week. It's time we fix things with Andrea, for the family. I read that on my phone in my kitchen, and I understood the entire architecture of what was about to happen before it happened. They hadn't wanted to know my daughter's name for 9 years. Now they wanted to be family again. In the same message, for the family. The text to me started the next morning. That's the Tuesday I told you about, the Grandma XOXO. Over the next few days there were more. We've missed so much. Life's too short. Let's not let pride keep us apart. Every one of them was warm and generous and completely empty, and every one of them arrived within 9 days of a number appearing in a trade magazine. I showed the messages to Hazel because she was 14 now, and I had decided a long time ago that I would not manage the truth for her the way my mother managed the truth for everyone. She read them on the couch, slowly, her thumb moving up the screen. "Let them come, Mom," she said. "I want to meet the woman who wrote that letter." And that was the moment I realized she knew, that she'd known for a long time. She saw my face change and she said quietly, "I found it when I was 12. The camp thing. I've known." I sat down next to her. I asked her the only thing I could think to ask. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you'd have looked exactly like you look right now," she said. And then, in a smaller voice, the 14-year-old giving way to the 12-year-old for just a second. "I thought it was my fault, that you didn't have them. I want to tell you I fixed it right there with the perfect words. I didn't. I just held on to her and told her, again, the thing I'd been telling her since she was 5, which was that she had never once been the problem, that the problem had a name and it wasn't hers. Then I did the practical thing, because I'm a practical woman. Before my mother and my sister arrived that Saturday, 9 days after the sale closed, I took the fireproof box out of the hall closet, and I put it in the drawer of the dining room table, where I sit, within reach of my right hand. I want to be clear about something. I did not do that to spring a trap. I did it the way you keep the receipt in your pocket when you walk back into the store. Not because you're planning a fight, because you know who you're dealing with, and you'd rather have the truth close by than have to go looking for it while someone lies to your face. They came on Saturday afternoon. My mother had done her hair. She was carrying a gift bag with the store's tissue paper still in it, tags probably still on the box inside. The first present she had ever bought for my daughter in 14 years of that child being alive. She came through my front door with her arms already open. "Look at you," she said, and she was looking at Hazel, only at Hazel, with a warmth I had never once seen her spend on that girl. "My beautiful granddaughter, I've missed so much." Hazel didn't step into the arms. She didn't step back either. She just stood there, still, the way she does, and she said evenly, "You didn't miss it, you mailed it back." For a half-second my mother's face did something. Then the smile smoothed over it. "Oh, sweetheart," she said. "The past is the past. We're together now. That's what matters." She held out the gift bag. "This is for you." Hazel looked at the bag, she didn't take it. Bridget had come in behind her, doing the thing Bridget does, where she inventories a room while pretending to admire it. Her eyes went over the new counters, the good appliances, the view of the yard. "This is a beautiful home, Andrea," she said. And then, lower, almost casual, "So the sale, was it all cash, or is it more complicated than that?" There it was already. 9 days of missing us, and the second question through the door was about the money. I made coffee, because that's what you do, and because I wanted to see how long they could hold the performance. Not long, it turned out. We sat in the living room, and my mother talked about the years the way you'd narrate a movie you hadn't actually seen. She said she'd always hoped we'd reconcile. She said families go through seasons. She said, and this is the part I keep coming back to, that no one needed to go dredging up old letters, that we were past all that. I hadn't mentioned a letter. She brought it up herself. She'd been carrying it all these years, the same as me. She just thought hers was safely gone. She tried a few of the old keys too, the ones that had always opened me. "We raised you, Andrea," she said, when the warmth wasn't landing. "Whatever you think of me, your father and I gave you everything. There's a debt there, whether you want to see it or not." She let that sit. Family helps family. That's not a rule I made up. That's just how it works. I noticed something, listening to her. She never once said she was sorry. She said the past is the past. She said people grow. She said we raised you. She built a whole cathedral of words, and not one of them was an apology, because an apology would have meant admitting there was something to apologize for, and she wasn't there to admit anything. She was there for $2 million. She'd just wrapped it in scripture. Then Bridget got to the point, because Bridget was on a clock she couldn't say out loud. "Andrea, I'm going to be honest with you, because that's what family does." She set her coffee down. "Todd's hit a rough patch. It's temporary. It's a cash flow thing. You know how construction is. And I thought, this is what family is for. We could do a family investment, nothing crazy, enough to clear one payment and get him past this." "How much?" I said. Not a question, really. She said the number like it was reasonable. 2 million. It's not a handout, Andrea. It's family investing in family. My mother put her hand on my knee. "After everything," she said gently, "surely you can help your sister. You have more than enough now." I looked at that hand on my knee. I thought about the fact that this woman had, in this exact tone of voice, called a 5-year-old baggage. I thought about the returned card. I thought about 9 birthdays and 2 empty seats at a school play. Here is where I have to stop and ask you something, because I've been on your side of this, the side where you're watching and you already know what you'd do. But it's easy to know from the couch. So before you hear what my daughter said next, and she did say something, and it changed the whole room, ask yourself honestly, would you write the check to keep the peace, or would you hold the line? Forgiveness and access are not the same thing. I didn't understand the difference for a long time. Tell me where you land. Because here's what happened in my living room. Hazel had been sitting on the arm of the couch, quiet, through all of it. And when my mother said after everything, "Surely you can help your sister," Hazel stood up. She didn't raise her voice. "She's my husband's daughter." She'd learned somewhere that the person who stays calm is usually the person holding something real. She walked to the dining room table, and she opened the drawer. and she took out the fireproof box, and she carried it back and set it on the coffee table between the coffee cups. She opened it. She took out a single sheet of paper, a printout, the one she'd made from the photo on her phone 2 years earlier, and she set it in front of my mother. "You keep calling yourself Grandma," Hazel said. "That's not what you called me in the letter." The room did go quiet then, not because anyone gasped, because my mother, for the first time in my memory, could not immediately find the right thing to say. She recovered. "She's good." "Sweetheart," she said, "I don't know what your mother has shown you, but people say things in anger. That could be anything. That could be a fake." "You didn't say it in anger," Hazel said. "You said it like it was a fact. Mom told me, but I didn't need her to tell me. I read it myself when I was 12. She tapped the printout once. "Someone else's leftover. Baggage you'll regret raising. You wrote it. And now you want to be my grandma because Dad's company sold." Bridget started to stand. "Okay, this is... Andrea, you've turned her against..." "You can't turn someone against a stranger," Hazel said. And she wasn't unkind about it, which was somehow worse. "You were never here to turn me against." My mother reached across the table, for the paper, to take it, to fold it, to make it small and gone the way she'd assumed it already was. I put my hand on her wrist, gently, but she stopped. "You're right," I told her. "That one's a copy. Let me get you the original." I reached into the box myself then. I laid 3 things on the coffee table side by side the way you'd lay out evidence for someone who needs to see it to believe it, because some people will only stop lying when the lie is sitting in front of them in their own handwriting. The letter. Her cursive. Someone else's leftover child. She is not our grandchild. The check. $50,000 in my father's hand. The memo line blank, because there is no word you can write on a memo line for what you're actually buying. And the Christmas card from 2019, returned to sender across the front, no underneath in the corner. $50,000, I said. That's what you priced her at, to make her disappear. Dad wrote the check. You wrote the words. I never cashed it. 9 years, and I never needed to. It's just paper now. I looked at her. But paper keeps. My mother stared at the 3 pieces of paper. Bridget stared at them too, and I watched something move behind Bridget's eyes. Not shame exactly. Calculation. She was recalculating. "That was a long time ago," my mother said finally. "I've grown. People grow, Andrea. I'm trying to be here now." "You mailed a Christmas card back with no written on it," I said. "That was 2019. You knew she existed. You knew where we lived. You knew her name. So when you tell people you never got the chance to know your granddaughter, that's not a season we grew out of. That's a thing you chose, and I have it in your handwriting." I laid the last thing on the table then. My phone. Open to the message Deb had forwarded me. "The trades put Copperline at 44 million. Todd's balloon is due next week. It's time we fix things with Andrea." "You didn't come back for her," I said. "You came back for a number in a magazine. You priced my daughter at $50,000 to vanish, and now you want 2 million to reappear. The only thing that changed in 9 years is the number on my husband's paperwork." And that was when Cole came in from the kitchen, where he'd been listening, where he'd let me do this because he understood it was mine and Hazel's to do. He isn't a table pounder. He said it the way he says everything, plainly, like he was quoting a price. "We're not investing in the people who tried to erase my daughter," he said. "That's not a negotiation. That's just no." Bridget's composure cracked, finally, along the one seam she couldn't hold. "Todd is going to lose everything by Friday," she started. And then she heard herself, heard the deadline come out of her own mouth, and stopped. There it was, out loud, the whole thing. Not reconciliation, a deadline. Friday. Nobody screamed. Nobody fainted. My mother did not clutch her chest, and no one applauded, because this was my living room and not a movie, and real rooms don't do that. What happened was quieter and, I think, worse for her. I took the check, the $50,000 check that had sat in a box for 9 years. And I stood up, and I walked it to the little shredder I keep by my desk for old client files, and I fed it in. It made the sound shredders make. I hadn't destroyed it in 2017 because back then it was proof of what they were. Now, with all of it on the table, it had done its job. It could go. Then I told them the terms, not shouted, told. You can leave now, I said. I'll email you both what I've decided so there's no confusion. There's no money. Not for Todd, not for anyone. And you don't get to Hazel through gifts or holidays or grandma. If either of you has anything to say to this family, it comes through me. That's it. That's the whole arrangement. My mother stood up slowly, gathering herself, gathering her purse, gathering the untouched gift bag off the couch, because even then she wasn't going to leave a $40 present behind. At the door she turned, and she tried one last time, in the voice she'd used my whole life, the one that made her cruelty sound like concern. You're going to regret cutting off your family, Andrea. Hazel answered her. Not me. She didn't cut off her family, my daughter said. You're just not in it. They left. I stood at the window and watched Bridget's car back out of the driveway, and I felt a lot of things. But the loudest one, strangely, was that I could finally breathe. I want to be careful about the next part, because this is where these stories usually give you a victory lap, and I've come to distrust victory laps. What happened after wasn't a triumph, it was a settling. Word moved through the family the way it does. Deb told me later that the group thread had gone silent for 2 days after that Saturday, and then it had started up again in a different key. Because here's the thing about a narrative you've controlled for 9 years. It only holds as long as no one has the receipts. My mother had told everyone a story, that I'd chosen money and a stranger's child over my own family, that I'd turned my back, that I was the one who left. For 9 years that was the official version, and I wasn't in the room to argue with it, and absence always loses to presence. But now there were 3 pieces of paper, and a forwarded text with a dollar amount and a deadline, and those things travel. An aunt I hadn't spoken to in years sent me a message that I've kept, in a different way than I keep the letter. I always wondered why you disappeared. She told us you chose money over family. Turns out she meant her own. Todd lost the business. I want to be honest that I had nothing to do with that, and I want to be equally honest that I didn't lose sleep over it. The balloon came due on its Friday, the way balloons do, and no one wrote the check, and the equipment went back to the lender, and the yard went up for lease. That wasn't my justice. That was just arithmetic finally catching up with a man who'd bet on rates staying low. Bridget stopped speaking to me entirely, which was less a punishment than a relief. The golden child doesn't send you a note when the light stops shining on her. She just goes quiet, and you realize the relationship was always the light, never the sister. My father was the one I didn't expect. He called about 2 weeks later. Not a text routed through my mother. A phone call, from his own number, in the middle of a weekday afternoon. I'd like to come by, he said. By myself. I won't stay long, and I won't ask you for anything. I let him come. I don't fully know why, except that a $20 bill and an unsigned card had been sitting in my box for 5 years, and I'd never quite been able to file him in the same drawer as her. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table, the box now back in the closet where it belonged, and he did not make excuses. That's the thing I'll give him. He didn't say he'd been controlled, though he had been. He didn't say it was all her, though a lot of it was. I wrote that check, he said. I sat in the other room while she said those things to a little girl, and I wrote the check, and I let it happen, and then I let 9 years happen. I'm not going to stand here and pretend I was a bystander in my own house. He turned his coffee cup a quarter turn, the way men of his generation do when the words are hard. The card, the $20. That was me. It was the smallest brave thing I could manage, and it wasn't brave at all because I didn't sign my name. I've thought about that a lot. Why now? I asked him. Because for 9 years I told myself she'd come around, and then I watched her try to buy her way back in the week your husband got rich, he said, and I finally saw it from the outside. I saw what I'd been part of. He looked at me, and his eyes were wet, and he didn't perform it. I'm not asking to be forgiven. I don't think I've earned that. I'm asking if there's a way to earn a place, slowly. And only if Hazel wants it, she gets to decide, not me. That was the first honest thing anyone in my family had said to me in 9 years, and I told him so. I called Hazel in. I didn't manage it. I've stopped managing the truth for her. My father said a version of the same thing to her, shorter, and she listened with her arms crossed, 14 and unconvinced and entitled to be. You sent me $20 once, she said. No name. Was that you? He said it was. She thought about it for a long moment. You can come to my game Saturday, she said finally. Just you. We'll see. We'll see. Not forgiveness, not access, fully. A door, open the width of a chain. He'd have to earn the rest, one Saturday at a time, and he seemed to understand that, and he took it. The thing I most needed to fix, I couldn't fix in a living room confrontation. I had to fix it in a quieter room, later, with just the two of us. Hazel and I were doing dishes a few nights after that. I told her I was sorry. Not for the confrontation, she'd earned that, and I'd never take it from her. I was sorry that she'd carried the letter alone for 2 years. That she'd taken a lie and made it her job to protect me from it. That a 12-year-old had appointed herself the keeper of my peace. She was quiet for a while, drying the same plate longer than it needed drying. I wasn't protecting the letter, Mom, she said. I was protecting you. I already knew who my family was. I've known since I was 5 and you bought me the good colored pencils. She almost smiled. I just needed her to know that I knew. That's all it was. I didn't want her money. I wanted her to have to look at me and know she was wrong. Then she took out her phone, and she opened a hidden album. She'd named it just in case, which broke my heart in a whole new direction. And she deleted it, the photos of the letter and the check, right there in front of me. Don't need it anymore, she said. I realized then that the person in this family who'd been keeping the real receipts was never me. It was her. She'd been holding the truth about herself in a hidden folder for 2 years, waiting, not for revenge, but for the day she could set it down. And she just set it down. That's most of the story. Let me tell you how it ends, because I don't want to end it on a shredder or a dollar amount, and I promised you it wasn't about the money. It's spring now, as I record this, May. Late enough in the season that the softball fields have dried out from the April rain, and the grass has that aggressive green it only gets for a few weeks. There's still an ornament hanging over my stove. A little tin sled, first family Christmas, 2016. I've never taken it down, not in 10 years, not in summer, not ever. Hazel touched it the other day while she was reaching for a glass, the way you touch something you've walked past 1,000 times, and she said without looking at me, we were a family before the money. That's the part she never got. That's the whole thing, really. My mother called a 5-year-old baggage. She used the word like a diagnosis, like something true about the child. But the only baggage in this family turned out to be a letter my mother couldn't take back, a thing she carried in her own memory for 9 years, certain it was gone, and it wasn't gone, because I don't lose things. I keep the letter still. I didn't shred that part. Not as a weapon. There's no one left to use it on, as a fact. There's a difference between the two, and it took me most of my adult life to learn it. This Saturday, Hazel has a game. Cole will be there, because he's always there, because being there is the entire thing he's ever been about. From a folding table in a shop with a juice box in the corner, all the way to a company that sold for a number in a magazine. Ray will be there, yelling at the umpire. My Aunt Deb is driving up. And my father will be there too, alone, sitting a little apart, earning it one inning at a time. Cole never sold the old van, by the way. The first one. The one with 190,000 miles on it that the transmission died in. It's in our garage, and Banner would have hauled it off with everything else, and he wouldn't let them. To remember where we started, he said, which is the most sentimental thing that plain-spoken man has ever said out loud. My mother came for $44 million. She left understanding what it actually cost her, and it was never money. It was 9 birthdays. It was a school play with 2 empty seats. It was a little girl's whole childhood, and a returned Christmas card, and the right to be called Grandma by a girl who, at 14, looked her dead in the eye and gave her the only inheritance she'd earned. The truth, said quietly, in her own words, handed back. If you've made it all the way here with me, thank you for staying. That word means something to me now. Staying, more than it used to. If this story reached you, do one thing before you go. Share it with the person who stayed for you when you had nothing worth coming back for. That's who your family is. Not the ones who show up for the number in the magazine. The ones who were already there, holding your hand at a coffee table, when someone with your same blood told you to put you down. They don't get to define you. Neither does a letter. And the people who called you baggage are usually the ones who couldn't carry anything at all. My name is Andrea Kite. That's my story, and this time, it's the true version, the one with the receipts.